On April 27th, the leaders of North and South Korea met for an historic summit. And it's only the third time that leaders of the two Koreas have met face to face. The summit comes after months of ups and downs. North Korea conducted 20 ballistic missile tests and even tested a hydrogen bomb. But South Korea's Winter Olympics opened the door to dialogue, culminating in the summit at the DMZ. We hear from our top Korea experts on the implications of the meeting, the impact on relations with the United States, and whether this could be the final chapter in over 3 decades of brinksmanship.
North Koreans' definition of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, or North Korea's concept of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, is different from that of the United States, where we're just talking about North Korea giving up nuclear weapons. But I do think this sets a nice it's a nice prelude to upcoming summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. President Moon knows they have to deliver something. South Koreans know that they have to deliver something out of this inter-Korea meeting to the United States to make sure that Trump-Kim Jong-un's meeting goes successfully. That will be one of the main goals for President Moon. Because President Moon knows no matter how successful inter-Korea summit is, the climax really is Trump-Kim meeting. And that has to be successful. So I think President Moon is going to try to really work hard to try to set that up.
There are 3 big lines of effort that come out of this summit. One is North-South dialogue. That's an important thing. There are dozens and dozens of North Koreans and South Koreans who've been separated, hundreds, by the Korean War, who are in their 80s and 90s. On a humanitarian basis, it makes a lot of sense to try to give them an opportunity to meet their cousins, brothers, once again. The North needs humanitarian aid. If there's a way the South can help provide it, ensuring that it goes to the people who need it and not the army, that's worthwhile. Reducing tensions between the 2 Koreas is worthwhile. That line makes sense. The other 2 lines of effort being advertised are denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Anyone who's dealt with the North Koreans over the last 20, 25 years on this question, Republican or Democrat, will be deeply skeptical.
It's hard for me to imagine that North Korea would agree to fully give up all of their nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles in a verifiable fashion without some attenuation of the U.S. alliance commitment to South Korea. Because for the North, that would mean the end of U.S. hostile policy towards North Korea. But the United States security commitment to South Korea is 60 years old. It is one of our core positions in Asia. And so it's very difficult for me to imagine that the United States would attenuate that commitment.
North Korea in 2012 declared that it is a nuclear weapon state. It's not going to change that. It might give access to, maybe even destroy some element of its nuclear weapons program, perhaps associated with the Yongbyon reactor, which is now 3 decades old and not very useful. But the diplomacy with North Korea has always been stopped by the question of verification. How do you verify that North Korea is in fact giving up its nuclear weapons? They've never granted meaningful verification opportunities that they are dismantling in an irreversible way their programs. There's no evidence that this summit or the follow-on summits with Donald Trump and others will yield that in any meaningful way. So that's a big question mark.
I think for China welcomes this development, and China will welcome Trump-Kim Jong-un meeting, particularly if it leads to some sort of a deal, either freeze for freeze or even reduction of U.S. troops from South Korea. All of that works for China. For Japan, I think their view of this summit is mixed. On one hand, it does signify a step towards more peaceful end, or it's at least a step away from all this potential conflict taking place in the Korean Peninsula. So that must be a relief. On the other hand, this sets up a meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump, and Japan is a little bit worried about potential deal that could be made between Washington and Pyongyang, because they don't want a deal that just involves intercontinental ballistic missile or even freeze for freeze or even peace treaty, because that doesn't really help Japan and Japan's security concerns.
The first thing is that we have to remember that a summit is not a strategy, and a summit without a strategy is dangerous, right? If the summit fails, then there's nowhere else to go because we're at the end of diplomacy, right? So we have to remember that the other side of a summit is a cliff. And if these summits are not carefully prepared and negotiated in advance, their failure could actually increase the chances for war. The only conceivable way that I could see the North Koreans giving up their weapons is if the United States ended its security commitment to South Korea or guaranteed the security of the entire Korean peninsula. And I don't see either of those things as being possible at the moment.
The North Koreans went into this with no intention of giving up their nuclear weapons. When Pyongyang uses phrases like denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, history, including my own experience negotiating with the North Koreans, demonstrates very clearly what they mean is, after the U.S. ends its nuclear umbrella, stops sanctioning North Korea, stops what North Korea calls its hostile policy, then and only then will North Korea consider itself giving up nuclear weapons. Anyone who's negotiated with the North Koreans in the past 20 years knows that that phrase sounds very tempting, but when North Korea says it's prepared for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, it's actually quite meaningless.
What price is the United States willing to pay for denuclearization? Has that price gone up from the past two agreements that we have made? What price are we willing to accept for failure of the negotiation? Are we willing to accept the higher cost of war that could come with a failure of the negotiation? In the end, the success of any negotiation will depend on whether the United States or North Korea is willing to change or compromise their core position, because these core positions are diametrically opposed to one another.
All eyes will be on Donald Trump. He himself wants a big, dramatic, history-making summit with Kim Jong-un. That's a bit dangerous if you're Japan or if you're the Pentagon. On the other hand, his national security team, many of them, people like National Security Advisor John Bolton, Secretary of Defense Mattis, his Assistant Secretary for Asia, Randy Schreiber, they know all of these pitfalls, traps, risks associated with charging pell-mell into a peace agreement that is actually no peace agreement at all, but possibly and very dangerously a post-facto legitimization of North Korea's nuclear weapons. That's a very, very slippery and dangerous slope. So the debates within the administration and with Congress will now intensify. The fact we're talking is good, but we haven't seen the North Korean nuclear threat go away, and the meeting we've had gives no indication that it will go away. So the problem's not solved, and there will be a lot of scrutiny that's necessary as we go through the next chapter in this increasingly dramatic, hopeful but not risk-free part of the Korean Peninsula denuclearization and diplomatic process.
For more analysis on the future of the Korean Peninsula, visit the Korea Chair on csis.org or visit Beyond Parallel.